In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to create a value chart using the primary colors in our kit, mixing the secondary colors from the primary colors, and then creating the tints, tones, and shades of each color. And when we talk about tints, tones, and shades, we mean for a tint, we add white to a color. So whenever you add white to a color, that's called a tint. A tone is when you add gray to a color, and shade is when you add black to a color. So I have the chart here. This is the chart that you saw in the presentation. It's 4 by 6, and I have the colors listed in order: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. So please follow this order. On my palette, I've already pre-mixed a middle gray. So this is exactly like the value scale, mixing equal parts of black and white for a middle gray. I have white, I have black, and then I went ahead and put some red, yellow, and blue on the palette paper as well. So whenever you're using your palette, it's a good idea to organize it consistently, but also to lay out your colors along the periphery, along the edge, and leave yourself space for mixing. So what I'm going to do is mix a couple of rows and end the video at that point. I'll show you what it takes to create the tints, tones, and shades for the red, which is right out of the tube. So laying down the red is not a problem. When we get to the orange, then I have to mix the orange. So I have to mix equal parts of red and yellow to get the orange, and then equal parts of white with the orange for the tint, equal parts gray with the orange, the original orange for the tone, and equal parts black with the original orange for the shade. Okay, and then you work your way down the line. So to begin, I can take my brush. I'm using rounds today. I'm going to use this synthetic bristle brush for the acrylic. I have my palette knife ready. I have a little bit of water here for cleaning the brush. I have paper towels ready. So everything's ready to go. Keep in mind the acrylic tends to dry fast when it's been out for a while. So we want to either keep it moist or squeeze out just the right amount of paint for you to finish what you have to do, and or work quickly. But I want you to work neatly, okay? So that's more important than working quickly. So let's fill in that first section, that first square. This chart is subdivided into 1-inch squares. It's 6 high by 4 across, and this is a red. Pretty straightforward, getting up to the edges. I created this chart using pencil first and then a Sharpie, so you can see it in the video, but you can use pencil. You don't have to use a Sharpie. And that's pretty much it. Blocking in that red section, okay? Clean your brush in between each color. At this point, what I need to do is mix equal parts red. You don't need a lot of paint. This should be enough paint to get me through this chart with an equal amount of white, equal parts white to red. So this is something you have to get used to it. But in the meantime, while you're learning this, learning color mixing, you saw me take the tip of the palette knife and lay out a little bit of red. And what I'm trying to do is put down the same amount, roughly the same amount of white, and then mix it. And try to keep your palette paper somewhat neat. I'll mix the tint over here, and then the tone over here, and then the shade over there, and then I'll just work my way down the line. So once you feel that tint is uniform enough, clean off your palette knife. Make sure that there's not too much of the original red or too much water on your brush, because you don't want this to be too transparent. If there's too much water in the paint, then the paint becomes what's called a wash, and it's more transparent, and we see the white of the palette paper, not the palette paper, but the canvas pad, And that is, again, it's kind of like adding white to the color, a little more white to the color, so it makes it lighter than it really is. So make sure the paint is opaque, not too much water mixed into the paint, or no water at all mixed into the paint, but you do want it to flow, especially when we get to these little corners. Okay, those are the tricky ones. All right, so here we have a tint. Clean off the brush, and I'm going to take the original red, not the tint. I want the red, and I'm going to mix equal parts middle gray with that. All right, it looks good enough. Maybe just a touch more red, and mix it up. Some of these colors, these tones especially, are beautiful. And mixing colors, and you can approach this kind of exercise in a lot of different ways. I'm only doing the primaries and secondaries, but they're warm primaries, cool primaries. You can do tertiaries. A lot of painters, especially watercolor painters, tend to create charts that they use. They have them up on the wall in their studio, and they can use as reference. And that's something that I tell my advanced painting students to do. Just a little bit of water to get that to flow. Having those reference charts can be helpful when mixing colors, looking for the right colors to mix to get whatever it is that you're looking for. So we're almost done with this row. The next section is going to be a shade. So I'm going to add equal parts black to the red. And you should see a clear gradation. It's the same concept that we were exploring with the value scale using grays. But you should see a nice clear gradation from light to dark. All right, so just a little bit of red, a little bit of black, roughly the same amount. Mix it up. When you're mixing the gradation, the difference should be clear obviously between the tints and the tone, but once you get to a color like blue, it's a dark color to begin with. So colors themselves, the hues coming right out of the tube, have their own values. Yellow is a light value compared to red, which is kind of an intermediate value, compared to blue, which is a dark value. You can see that here. The yellow is light. The red is intermediate in comparison to the yellow and the blue. Once you get to a point where you're mixing tones and shades with the blue, it may be a little harder to tell the difference, but it's okay. I mean, it's just part of the nature of color and the colors that you're working with, and the values that you're starting off with. This is the shade. And this is good to know and good to hang on to and to have as we move into different projects involving color schemes, and creating tints, tones, and shades, whether it's for modeling or for creating designs, utilizing different values. Let's get that down. We're almost done with this row. All right, terrific. Okay, the next row will be the orange. You know, there are different ways that you can approach this, but I'm going to suggest that you go a row at a time while you have your middle gray mixed and you have your black and white out. Of course, you can do the yellow and then the blue, do the primaries. Let it dry, because you don't want to put your hand on the wet paint. That's another reason why you might want to go in sequence. But I'm going to go ahead and do the orange and mix that up. And to get the orange, it's equal parts red, and I want to mix enough of that, and yellow, enough of that to get me through the tints, tones, and shades. Just mix it up. Get a nice orange. And then begin the process again. Okay, so orange with white to get a tint. About the same amount. Mix it up. And lay it down. I forgot to put down the orange. Okay, so we skipped, we won't skip it, I'll go back into it, but I forgot to put down the orange in its place. I'll take care of that in a second. Get rid of this. So this is the tint. That's a nice color also. The orange tint. You take care of that orange hue, get that color down. Okay, you can see the difference between that and the red. That's good. When you mix colors, your secondaries from primaries, sometimes you don't get the richness that you might be looking for, the most intense orange. To get the most intense orange, you would have to have a warm red and a warm yellow. Well, that's why they make paints, cadmium oranges, and you can buy them in the tube, and they're more intense and pure. But still, theoretically, you can mix anything from the primaries, anything that you need. And it's a good way to learn paint mixing, color mixing, using a reduced palette, limited palette, and mixing what you need from there. So, orange and middle gray, equal amounts, and mix. And you can even mix a bit with the brush. Load up the brush, lay down the color. This is a tone, the orange tone. As we work our way down, the tints, tones, and shades should reflect the original value of the color, of the hue. So if it's red and orange are kind of similar. Once we get to the yellow, the tints, tones, and shades should begin to look lighter. And then that way you know you're doing the right thing. You're headed in the right direction. So we're almost done, at least I'm almost done with this part of it, the demonstration. But I'm going to continue and finish this chart, and then I'll show you that at the end. So what I need is orange and black. There is a difference. That's good. I mean, it's darker than the tone, but the shade itself looks different from the red. But you see how dark. I mean, in terms of value, they're similar, but there's a different underlying undertone to it. All right, so that part is done. The first two rows are taken care of. I created the tints, tones, and shades for the tints, tones, and shades. For the red, which was pretty straightforward, you're using the red straight out of the tube. And then for the orange, I had to mix the orange by mixing equal parts of red and yellow to get that orange, lay that down, and then begin the process of mixing the tints, the tint, the tone, and the shade of the orange. And now I'll work my way down. Okay, well, we have our completed value scale, exploring the tints, tones, and shades of the primary colors in our kit, red, yellow, blue, the secondary colors mixed from the primaries, orange, green, and violet. Again, tints, a tint is when you add white to a color. In this case, we're mixing everything in equal amounts, 50% white with 50% red. The tone is when you add gray to a color, and we added 50% gray, a middle gray that we had mixed already and ready to go. Mixing a middle gray with the red to get a tone, and a shade is when we mix black in equal amounts with the color, in this case red. Tints, tones, and shades in a primary and secondary color value chart.